I'm Matt.
And I'm Nate.
And this is Not Quite Religious, a podcast where a Christian pastor and former evangelical turned atheist have conversations about faith, religion, philosophy, and life while drinking coffee.
Welcome to episode 32, where we discuss a Catholic priest's generosity, John Cleese narrating the Screw Tape Letters, and the life of Brian.
I don't actually remember much about the life of Brian, so I think that's going to be your part.
If you were to take the Gospels and make it a comedy about a guy who's not actually God.
I do remember that. I remember what it's about, but it's been a long time since I watched it, so probably as inspired by this.
We could talk about the meaning of life instead then, if you remember.
I don't remember that one either. I actually don't remember even, Monty-Python and the Holy Grail, very well. You know, I can quote, the parts that everybody can quote. There are things that I want to review. But before we get into why we're talking about Monty Python and John Cleese.
Which, there is a linear, conversation here. It flows and follows very well.
Yeah. We want to talk about the coffee, right?
Yeah.
So Nate finally brought the coffee that's been, that he's been talking about, promising to bring Share Coffee, which is out of Amherst, right?
Yeah, or Northampton, one of the two.
Okay.
I think it might have started in Northampton and then moved to Amherst.
Okay, because there's a shop in both places, I think.
Yeah.
There's a cafe in Amherst.
I first encountered it in Northampton.
Oh, okay.
But, I just mean, I was working at Smith College at the time and I needed a coffee, so that was where I went.
Yeah, I'm just now taking, my second sip of it.
Yeah.
And my first conscious sip of it, where I'm actually
thinking about... talk about we normally say the brew and the things.
Oh yeah, it's the Daily Driver, and the great thing about this company is, and I don't think I've ever seen this before, is it's the Daily Driver blend, and they actually tell you what's in the blend and give you the percentages. So it's 20% Colombian, and it's 80% Mexico.
There you go.
Which, then they even name the farm, but I don't think we need to get into all that. Just the point being, I've never seen a coffee company actually give you the percentages. Yeah. In fact, the roaster that I worked for, circa 2007, 2008, strictly forbade me, made me sign a thing saying that I wouldn't tell what the blends were.
I catered an event yesterday and people were like, how'd you make this? And I was like, I followed my recipe.
Yeah.
And they're like, what? And I'm like, the reason you're paying me is I know how to do this. And if I tell you how to do it.
Right. Right. So, you could take this home and make your own Daily Driver. I usually actually buy single origin beans and then do my own blends. I grind the beans myself. So I'm happy to see that. But the other thing I wanted to mention about this on the negative side, and I don't want to be too hard on Share, because they make an excellent product, and that's what matters.
Yeah.
So totally pushing this company this morning. But one of the things that I used to do at the old gig back in 2007 was I would taste the coffee and then I would describe it. And within the coffee world, there are two schools of thought in terms of how to describe a coffee. There's the school of thought which is the one that I subscribe to. Just tell them what it tastes like in terms that they can understand. If it's got a chocolatey taste, you don't need to say anything about acidity. You don't need to say anything about body. Any of that stuff. I mean, maybe in certain contexts where you're around other coffee nerds and people who care about that kind of stuff. Yeah. By all means, go into all of that. But then the other school of thought is
which is the Share school of thought.
Which is the Share school of thought. Is to go a little bit more cutesy. That was your word.
Artistic.
Abstract was my word.
There you go.
Cutesy was your word.
Yeah, cutesy is definitely cutesy.
And so they described this as creamsicle, which, okay. Could have said orange, but creamsicle's a little bit cute. Caramel's fine. But then it's the third one that got me into a minor rage.
Yeah. Breaking stuff.
Yeah, not really. Happiness is the third description.
It tastes like happiness.
What does happiness taste like?
Apparently, it's right in your hand.
Like, I can think of...
If you are listening and you know what happiness tastes like, please write in, message us, do something.
Yeah, and try to have it be clean.
Yeah. So the closest thing that I can think happiness tastes like, and it tastes nothing like this coffee, is there's a really... So there's a local cheese and charcuterie beer store called Provisions. Mm-hmm. And it's also in Northampton and Amherst. And for the event that I catered yesterday, they asked for a charcuterie board, and they were paying. They upped it to like the premium, which means like not just regular salami and prosciutto, but like I'm gonna go get some dank stuff. And this company Fermi makes an Iberico salumi, and it's so umami, it like melts in your mouth. Like you just like your mouth waters, and you're just like, yeah. This
So this coffee
it doesn't taste like Iberico.
Yeah. That would be bad if it did.
Pork coffee? Yeah, pork. It's like fancy hot dog water.
Yeah. So Folgers. Creamsicle caramel and Folgers. That's what Cher is saying their taste like. But no, it's hard for me to like... I'm going to give it an 8.5, and I feel bad about it because we've been talking it up so much.
Yeah, I think it's a 9.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And John would give it a 3.5.
Are we ever going to get to the magical 10? We're going to like find a coffee where we're both just like, that's it. I'm done. Like no other cup of coffee will compare. So
it has to have the same effect on me that what was the name of the terrible coffee that we got?
Mary Lou's.
Where you drink it and just immediately you're like, oh, like it has to have, but the opposite. That's what I think.
The Mary Lou's was so disappointing. It was so disappointing. I was like so excited to find it. I was like, oh man,
right.
Maybe we need to get the coffee that goes through the cat's intestines and ferments. And
I've not heard about this.
No,
no.
It's like $200 a pound, maybe even more. But it's I think Philippines. Maybe Thailand, that part of the world. And these cats eat these coffee beans, and it ferments in their intestines. And they harvest them when the cat poops. Yeah. And they rinse them. But it's supposedly fantastic. I learned about it on Andrew Zimmern's like Bizarre Foods. And like sometimes his foods, he's like, never again. But he was like, this is fantastic. And like even other Caucasians, he's like, try this coffee. And they're like, oh. So it's...
How much is it for like... It's $200 a pound.
I don't know. We can Google it after the episode. And
yeah.
You know what? I'm going to Google it now. You set up something else for a minute.
Well... The episode this morning, to transition out of coffee, is about, we mentioned in the opening, a Catholic priest and John Cleese and the Screwtape Letters written by C.S. Lewis. And that's based on an experience that I had a couple weeks ago. I just got together for coffee with the local Catholic priest in Brattleboro, Vermont. And he brought gifts. And I didn't, which I feel bad about. And now I wonder if that's a thing that's expected of clergy that I just didn't know about when you meet together. But he brought gifts. He brought like a little icon for me to have, and also a CD of the Screwtape Letters as read by John Cleese. Now, for those of you who don't know, Screwtape Letters is written by C.S. Lewis. I think most of our audience is familiar with who C.S. Lewis is. Maybe not so much John Cleese. I don't know. John Cleese is known for Monty-Python and the Holy Grail. But there's a comedy, Life of Brian, like Life. Comedy sketches in the late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah. The parrot is dead. It's deceased. It is no more.
Yeah, like classic British humor. But he's also quite a vocal atheist, and most of his movies are, they're either satires of English culture, or in the case of Life of Brian, it's a satire like a direct satire on Christianity.
Yeah, Meaning of Life has some of that. They have the opening song, "Every sperm is sacred, every sperm is great."
Yeah.
If a sperm gets wasted, God gets quite irate. And that's the Catholic house. And there's like thousands of children. They're like popping out of cupboards, and they're like super poor because they have so many kids. So they're like everywhere. Right. And like the Protestant house is like one child in a different wing.
Oh, that's great. You know, and unfortunately, like I have this cursory familiarity with John Cleese and his movies, but like I'm not versed enough in them to be able to just pull something up like you just did, but I was fascinated that it was John Cleese reading C.S. Lewis. Yeah. And my question became, what's the draw? And I thought, is there actually a chance that like John Cleese is being such a troll that he's going to do a C.S. Lewis reading? Or is there a chance, which I think is more likely, that he happens to appreciate Lewis in some way?
Yeah. Let me stop you there. The coffee's called Kaya Kopi. It's from Indonesia, so I was wrong about that. And it's not eaten by a cat, but by a civet.
Okay.
And so Kopi Lawa coffee, it's $198 on sale from $299 for a few ounces.
Oh my god.
So,
well, I don't know. I don't know if that's a life experience I need for that price.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be life-changing if it costs that much.
Yeah. So. It's got to completely revolutionize my life.
Yeah. Someday, right. When the podcast blows up.
Yep. Someday when we're gone, somebody finds this like 200 years from now. They're
going to be like, why did they eat cat poop?
They're going to be like, these guys are geniuses. Where do they get this stuff?
All right, John Cleese, either troll or has
either troll or like has
some respect.
Has some respect, and there was an easier way to figure out which was which than the route I took, and I took the harder route on purpose because I like my own mind better than Google.
Yeah.
So I could have just Googled like John Cleese, C.S. Lewis. Like there probably been some article somewhere like tell me exactly why,
right? What
it is, but I didn't do that. I tried to make my own assumptions, and what I did was, I don't think I needed to dive back into Lewis because God knows I've read so much of him, mostly involuntarily.
Really?
But some voluntarily.
I read most of Lewis voluntarily. I really enjoyed him.
Yeah.
When I was a Christian. I mean, I still enjoy some of his stuff. I think he's a great writer, good intellect.
Yeah.
You know, the Narnia Chronicles are fantastic.
Yeah.
Till We Have Faces made me cry.
Yeah. Right. And I still want to get to that because you're not the first person in the last 2 years. It's like Till We Have Faces is.
Yeah. Even the Space Trilogy I enjoyed until the third book.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think Lewis is a good writer, a good intellect, and people can appreciate that whether they're atheists or not. But one of the things that I was doing, like rather than go back into my, I didn't watch anything or read anything about Lewis. And this is like me doing 30 minutes of research, so it wasn't like I wasted a...
To be fair, you had jury duty again.
Yeah.
So...
It wasn't like I wasted a work day. I did have jury duty. That's a whole other story, but I didn't waste a whole work day researching this idea, but I did watch a couple YouTube videos of Cleese interviews, and in one he was talking about he was being asked about like his brand of humor, which anybody who does that work probably gets that question all the time, and I imagine they don't know how to describe it.
Yeah. It's
like, no, my brand of humor is there it is, it's on the page, but something he said triggered, I don't want to say triggered because that triggers people. Like something that he said made me realize what the connection was. And he said, I think he said, what I think I'm trying to do with my comedy is expose how over serious we are and give us a chance to just all breathe.
Yeah.
By seeing the silliness of it all. And as I was listening to John Cleese read the Screwtape Letters, I'm thinking that's the connection between him and Lewis, is that sensibility, that real virtue doesn't spring from knowing what the virtues are and applying them. That if anything, that's where pride comes from. But actually real virtue springs from a view of self and the world that's able to go, this is all sort of silly.
And now we're back to nihilism.
Yeah, except Lewis clearly isn't a nihilist,
right.
but I think he has that sensibility where I feel like often he's clearly, like you said, a great intellect, but almost as if he's writing from the perspective of regular people.
Yeah, I mean, when I started reading him, I instantly connected because it doesn't feel like even his theology books, quote unquote, don't feel like theology books. You know,
Right.
like you read Mere Christianity, and he's like, this is sort of like the thing, and this is how I came to it, and
Right.
like take it or leave it. But here's like the basic, like my stripped down version of how the whole Christian story plays out.
Yeah. And he even has, Screwtape say those kinds of things, like, we want the creature to take himself seriously.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the striking ones to me is when he's writing to Wormwood, and he's like, just get him to church, but like make him look at his neighbor who he knows drinks too much or is judgmental, or the old lady who's always screaming at the kids, like, but get him to church. There's no greater way to make sure he's
right.
Like, which is a comment on the seriousness, right?
Right.
Like, church is a show, and especially this is what 1950s, 60s Britain, like UK,
40s, 50s,
50s. So very different culture. Where like even in the U.S., most people went to church. Like 90% of people, whether they believed or not, probably wouldn't say that they didn't believe in public.
Right.
But you went to church and you dressed up and you wore your Sunday hat, and it was a very formal, like.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. For me, that makes me think of something that I think we've talked about a few times, but maybe we can talk about it again from a different angle. And that is, this idea that, well, maybe we haven't talked about it exactly in these terms, but I'm thinking about the relationship between virtue and sensibility. Because I observe in almost all like popular atheists, minus a couple, they're able to maintain this against all the stereotypes that Christians launch against them.
Yeah.
They're able to maintain this sort of sensibility that Lewis, the Christian, lauds. And I mean, like, this sense of wonder, awe before the world, this sense of childlike humility. Not always in the way that they argue. Like, Hitchens is a good example because, like, he's an arrogant bastard on the stage, but, like, I still get the sense that, like, when he's talking about when he's not trying to bash theism, he has a very, like, childlike, straightforward view of what life is about.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually think he's the least arrogant of the four horsemen. Actually, Dennett probably, but Dennett's the least arrogant in a straight, I'm a philosophy professor way.
Right.
Right, where he's like, not necessarily directly attacking, but he's writing philosophy, and he's trying to apply philosophy, right? So that's a different type of arrogance. Like, he uses big words and his demeanor is, but he's writing for intellectuals.
Yeah.
And like, he makes no apologies for it.
That can come off as arrogant, but I think if you understand what he's doing, I don't think it's arrogant.
Yeah. But I think Harris and Dawkins they grate me.
Right.
Like, because what I loved about Hitchens is, even though he wanted to take down religion, he was very clear why. And he bashed all faiths, like, fairly. He was one of the very few to speak out pretty, like, early on against Islam and not care if they were gonna, put out a hit on him.
Yeah.
I was going somewhere and I lost my thought. Harris just dismisses arguments. He's just like, well, you're stupid.
Harris is the first one that I thought of that doesn't fit what I'm saying.
Yeah.
He's the first one that came to mind.
I
think he is arrogant.
Yeah, he totally is. And he's been called out. Where I think Hitchens didn't just dismiss religious arguments. He engaged with them and then wanted to show why they were false. But I think, you watch Harris and Dawkins, and like Dawkins' most famous TED Talk is like, we should make religious people feel stupid.
Yeah.
Like, straight up. He's like, make them uncomfortable, kick them out of these spaces. I'm just like, that doesn't seem like
right.
Okay.
Right. But then I think of guys like, Sagan and
Neil deGrasse Tyson.
And Neil deGrasse Tyson, who has that very childlike way about him. And even when he's laughing at his opponents, it doesn't come off quite like mocking. Sometimes it does.
Yeah.
But even going like way back, like Hume had that same sort of, like, guys, God doesn't exist. Like, we still get to like have sex and eat apples. Like that Epicurean sort of sensibility is, I guess, what I'm getting at. That, and I had somebody else in mind too. Well, then compare, as we were talking, I was just thinking, like, as compared to the actual nihilists, which I guess is our thing now that we like to talk about. Who, like Nietzsche and the existentialists.
But I think you're right with Cleese and Hitchens and Lewis sort of coming from a similar cloth, and I think the sort of the group of Christians I would place with Harris and Dawkins are like William Lane Craig. Mm-hmm. Like, you watch him engage, and he never engages the argument. It's the same thing in every debate. And if you watch any of the YouTube stuff, he straight up, like, not only dismisses without engaging, but will change the terms mid-argument to skirt around.
Are you talking about Harris or William Lane Craig?
I'm saying they're very similar, where they're just dismissive. They don't engage, and they're arrogant. And I think Craig is extremely arrogant, personally. Like, not Ravi Zacharias arrogant, but that's a whole
that's a whole other thing. While we're on this kick of just giving our opinions on various
people think I'm arrogant, by
like
the way.
debaters out there. Who'd you just say? I feel like William Lane Craig is always reading from a script.
Yeah, he's got,
which I don't know if that comes off to me as arrogant, but it's a little bit like it comes off as disingenuous.
Yeah, so he's even worse on YouTube channels. So my YouTube, I watch stuff like Veritasium, which is an amazing, and what else? The thing with Dustin, it's like super famous. Anyway, I also occasionally watch apologetic and counter-apologetic videos. There's some atheists who I follow, and they often are debating with Christians, and the Christians are debating with them. So they'll cut each other's clips and show, like, this person said. So it's like a conversation.
Right.
But whenever Craig enters the conversation, like if he's a guest part of a Christian apologist, it's like it is so frustrating, like grating, because he never once engages with the new argument. He's just like, let's go back to Kalam. And it's like, we're not discussing Kalam, we're discussing this other argument that these two have been debating, and you're coming in and you're just totally,
right.
And he does come down to just like, strict reform people, at the end of the day, he's like, well, your heart's dark, and so you can't see the truth. And like, that's so like, I mean, that's like me debating any Christian and being like, well, you're brainwashed and you're in a cult. Like, neither one of those further the discussion or leads us closer to truth.
Right.
It's just a way to stay in your box and not engage.
Although I did say that to somebody a couple years ago, with intent, like, and the intention.
You said which of those statements?
I said to an evangelical Christian, "You're in a cult,
Yeah,
and you're brainwashed."
some of them are.
And since then I've noticed, because we don't live in the same proximity, so I'm just judging based on what I'm seeing on Facebook for the most part.
Yeah.
I've noticed it, like a shift. I shouldn't give myself too much credit, but it was a person who I thought, it wasn't the type of person. You know how you can tell this person's about to go, he's about to go full deconstruction.
Yeah.
You know, like you could just tell some of the things they start saying. It doesn't start out like, most people aren't like you, Nate. They don't just wake up in the morning
I know.
and go.
Paul of Tarsus experience,
Yeah.
but opposite.
I don't believe it.
There were things that had crept in.
Yeah.
But
And I think in your position, it made it harder
yes.
to say those doubts publicly. But like, and my Reformed Christian friends will comment on this. I don't actually disagree with them. There does seem to be like a path that people follow where it's like they all kind of end up in the same place, but it doesn't start with like I don't believe in God, or I'm a full on progressive. It like starts with like, I think women should be pastors. You know, like,
Right.
like,
Yeah.
or something like that. Or
my gay friend's a seriously nice person.
Yeah, and you're like, you're gonna go there, like,
there's a podcast that it's on the internet, but they don't no longer record because one of the hosts got incredibly sick. But it's called Everyone's Agnostic, and they have like 400 episodes or something. And when I was deconstructing or when I deconverted, it was helpful, and I was invited to their private group and was having conversations with other people, and like 90% of the podcast is the route you're talking about. They're like, you know, I started seeing some corruption in church, and then this happened, and the youth pastor, you know, the second a girl turned 18, they were married, and I was like, and at the end they're like, and now I'm an atheist, or now I'm an agnostic, or, you know, now I'm thinking about being a Buddhist, but... Yeah.
I mean, I'm so terrified, and this is just my ego and my pride, like, I'm just so terrified of being a cliche. Of just, like, being a number.
Yeah.
That I've spent so much time, I think, wasted so much energy resisting that. But honestly, I really don't think I could wear the atheist name tag. But I do think I've gone far enough at this point where, at least reformed, like seriously reformed evangelical Christians are like, that guy.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair,
that guy's not one of us.
To be fair, though, those people like reject 95% of Christians is not Christians.
Right.
So.
Right.
You know, like I think I've told this story before, but my evangelism professor at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky, said his only goal is to convert Catholics to Christianity.
Yeah.
And like me and my friend Patrick were in class together, and we both are friends with Tristan. Hey, Tristan, who's clearly a Christian. And we were like, we like have Catholic friends who are Christians. And he was like, no, you don't. Like, so
you get to have your own idiosyncratic definition.
Yeah. So I mean that reformed, hyper reformed guys don't think you're a Christian. It's like you're in with the Orthodox and the Coptics and the Catholics and like even sometimes Arminians. And actually, the same evangelical professor, he had an Arminian, he's teaching us Reformed theology, and he said he was preaching a sermon at the end, a guy came up and he said, I got saved 4 times during your message. And his response was like, you haven't been saved once.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, I just, you're right, but our bubbles feel like the whole world.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, so most of my Christian friends are hyper reformed, or
because that's where we were,
of that ilk.
Yeah.
Or somewhere there, and even the Arminian ones tend to think about the world differently. Like those, I think those two categories are part of the same conversation. It's not like
two sides of the same coin.
It's two sides. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, historically they come from the same thread.
But like what you're saying is right. The bird's eye view of the whole thing just makes it sound ridiculous.
Yeah.
When you're like, you're converting Catholics to Christianity. Right. What's next? Are you going to convert Shiites to Islam?
Right.
Like,
yeah.
And that's even less ridiculous, because the Shiites and Sunnis it's not like 80-20.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it is with Catholic and Protestants. I don't know if that's the right number, but like most of the world's Christians are Catholics.
Right.
And what are we talking about? What does this word even mean?
Right.
It means whatever you want it to mean. Nihilism. There we go. But yeah, I maybe the sensibility with Cleese and Lewis, maybe Sagan, Hitchens, maybe it's just Anglos.
I mean, there is a culture there.
Yeah.
In Britain. I think, the reason Cleese can, get on about the stuffiness of people is, I think, especially when he was, I'm going to say this having never been to Britain. But I do watch a lot of British television.
I have been to a Holiday Inn.
Not the British television that everyone knows. Like, I was into really serious, there was a few years there where all I was watching on Netflix and Apple TV, or it wasn't even Apple TV, it was iTunes where you'd buy it, were niche supernatural British television shows, like Misfits and just crazy stuff. Anyway, so I feel from there I'm an expert in British culture, but it does seem like British culture is a little more hard. It's more New England than it is Southern. And I should say New England is more British. We're a little standoffish, right?
Yeah. I don't think I notice it.
Because you're here.
Yeah.
You notice it when you leave.
Uh-huh.
Like when I used to travel and preach at other places and, Tennessee and Georgia and Florida. I'm like, why are these people saying hi to me?
The weird thing,
are you smiling at me because you're gonna mug me?
Exactly. I have to leave to see it because I think people are nice.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything. I think they're polite. That's my view. Is you just mind your own business. Like if you walk by somebody in the street, it's like they're doing their thing, you're doing their thing. Right. Don't interrupt. Don't inject yourself in a conversation. And if you do, you better make sure you're a charming, engaging person. Otherwise, you're just wasting somebody's time, which to me is I've lived in the Northeast 18 years, so I've learned how to converse as an adult. So even though I grew up in the Midwest and still probably have part of that culture, the way I've learned how to socialize has been in the Northeast and in New England. And I don't think people here are rude at all. I mean, any more than people are rude.
Yeah.
People get in fights from their car everywhere.
Right. More so in Florida.
People yell at people everywhere. So, but yeah, you do notice it when you go outside because it's
But I think Cleese is talking, and in Lewis too, about even the higher stuffiness. One of the, besides the Dead Parrot skit on Monty Python, which I think is probably the most famous Monty Python skit, but there's also the Ministry of Funny Walks or Silly Walks, which everything is a ministry, and that's a very formal, right? And all of a sudden the ministry is of funny walks, and you have to demonstrate it, register it, and prove that it's silly enough. And like, there's a government official who's like, nope, like, not silly enough, or like, that's already trademarked.
Brilliant. Yeah.
And I think Lewis does that in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or the Narnia trilogy, where by the end, oh gosh, who's the older sister? Not Lucy.
Not Lucy. Susan.
By the end of that series, Susan doesn't believe anymore because it's silly nonsense and childish. Yeah. She's like, oh, it was great make-believe, but I've grown out of that. Mm-hmm. Right? And I think Lewis is there commenting about losing the wonder of things. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, and this is probably true of most of us. Like, between the daily grind and raising kids and paying bills and mowing the lawn, like, you lose the wonder of a child. Mm-hmm. Where, like, my kids are like, did you see the airplane? Like, Bash, he's going to be 3. And, dude, we drive by a cow. And he's like, cow! Cow! And we live in places with lots of cows. Like, there's a farm within walking distance of my house that has lots of cows. I'm like, dude, you see these cows every morning on the way to school and every afternoon on the way home. But he's still like, dude, did you see it?
Yeah.
And, like, I'm not as excited about seeing a cow anymore.
Yeah, but, like, I think that's part of the joy of parenting, too, is to get to allow yourself to experience things through the eyes of a child. Sometimes it fails, though. Sometimes when it's your idea, it doesn't work as well. Like, I'm going to take my kids to something I think that they would like, and half the time I'm right, and half the time I'm wrong. Yeah. It's like, I liked this when I was a kid. It's like, yeah, because you were a kid in the 80s, and the 80s were boring. It was either this or, like, stare at...
literally make mud pies, which was, like, a thing.
You're like, hey, kids, want to make mud pies? And they're like, I'm playing Angry Birds.
You want to go down a metal slide that's been sitting in the sun for 7 hours and will burn your skin? Oh, and at the end, it's just a concrete pile, so don't fall off.
Yeah. So what you were saying about, like, British culture, like, it can poke... what I hear you saying is, like, it can poke fun at its own seriousness really well, because that sense of seriousness is really there.
Well, I think satire, I think it lives better in stuffiness.
Right. And stuffiness is a good word, because here's another interesting thing too, and we might be coming against the clock here. But just in terms of, like, church services, which is something I've been thinking about a lot lately, the way that we do service at my church, which is called Community Bible Chapel, which was initially a Plymouth Brethren church, which is, like, if you don't know anything about the Brethrens, you can look them up, but basically there's lots of Brethren churches that don't believe in having pastors. So
are they related to Quakers and Shakers at all?
In relation to what I'm talking about, yes, which is, like, form of worship. Yeah. So, like, almost like extemporaneous is valued as good. Like, but what that ends up turning into is it being about, I think the way that a service, like, makes you feel. So it's in those kinds of churches that you get a lot of modern megachurch kind of culture, where you have just people writing their own songs all the time. Yeah. And church turns into a rock concert. And I was thinking about this, where it's like, the older people in those congregations, they can complain that church is a rock concert, but these same people were, like, doing the same thing in the 60s and 70s. It's just the style of music changed, actually.
Which is why a lot of those mega churches are not even mega have a traditional service earlier.
Yeah, but, like, the sensibility is the same. I'll give you an example. Like, so I've been hanging out and praying with Episcopalians for, like, 3 or 4 years at this point, and one morning they asked me to pick the hymn, and I picked a hymn that like it was Blessed Assurance, I think, or something like that, or Great is Thy Faithfulness, and they didn't know it. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, how about how great Thou art? They didn't know it. Like
yeah.
I'll Fly Away. They didn't know it. Like Amazing
so
Grace, they knew, but like they knew it as an Elvis song.
Yeah.
Like,
how do you? Just in our culture, how do you get away with not hearing those songs?
Well, then when I opened their hymn book, I was like, I don't know any of these songs.
Right. But some of especially when I think of like I'll Fly Away, it was in Oh Brother Where Art Thou soundtrack.
Fair enough.
Johnny Cash covered it. Like
they don't think about those songs as hymns, though.
Okay. They're like, that was a cool...
It's not like they don't know...
like, that was a cool bluegrass song. And you're like, that's not actually where it came from.
That's exactly how they think of it.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is this tradition, like in mega churches, they play songs. Now it fits 2020, 2022. I would argue it fits more like 2011, and they think it fits 2022. But like...
I haven't been to a mega church in a while.
You know what I mean?
Probably...
Like the Hillsong...
Yeah.
Bethel kind of music, like Coldplay inspired music is what I call it. It's simple chords.
Yeah.
It's easy music. It's three chords.
It's pop.
G, E, it's pop.
Yeah. Take out God and put in Ryan. And you
yeah, right. And everybody knows this, and it's easy to make fun of, and everybody makes fun of it. There's plenty of funny stuff on the internet to look up about it. But it was the same thing, I'm saying, in like the 50s and 60s and 70s. The old hymns that I consider old hymns are just as folksy.
Yeah.
Just as pop. Just as simple. Whereas the hymns that the Episcopalians were teaching me that I didn't know was really complex music.
Sure.
And not easy to sing.
Well, also probably written for an organ, not a piano.
And you had to be good at singing. Otherwise, you should just not sing it. Because you're going to screw it up.
Right.
And of course, Episcopalians come from Anglican, which is English, but also like there's this weird relationship that for years and years the English were Catholics, and they didn't stop being Catholic in sensibility. They only stopped being Catholic in name, so that the king could divorce his wives. And, so the sensibility is the same, and
I think they got wiped out in a few wars too.
That didn't, that helped. But this, if you don't know anything about Episcopalianism or Catholicism theologically, and all you had to go on was how you experienced their liturgies, you would say the church is the same.
Yeah.
There's little stuff that's different that to Catholics and Episcopalians is not little, but I'm just saying, like, the person who doesn't know anything, they like.
Although, I think we are actually starting to come against the clock. I think while I was still an evangelical, the Pope welcomed certain Anglicans and Episcopals back into the Catholic Church, saying, like, we're all the same tradition. If you guys can get behind like this little doctrine, you can keep all your other pet ones.
Yeah.
It sounds like I'm pretty sure that happened because they were like, yeah, we're pretty close.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look that up, but yeah, that sounds right. And
sort of like, is it the Franciscans that are like sort of an outlier and like?
Well, a lot of orders are outliers,
right? But the Catholic Church is like, we'll tolerate you, like you're goofy and.
Tristan is gonna hate this analogy because it actually falls apart really quickly, but I think people will get it in a cursory way. So like when Jesus is like, you build the tombs of the prophets and martyrs that you killed. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying like all of the people that are considered saints or all of these orders were like, they're all martyrs. And my point here isn't about the brutality of the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
My point here is like, most of these people are not well liked in their time. Mm-hmm. Not all. Usually like the doctors and the theologians, like Aquinas, were always like Anselm.
Yeah.
But like people like Francis and Julian of Norwich and like the mystics essentially.
Yeah.
Like now they're like, oh, Francis. At the time they're like, he's a freaking weirdo. They thought he was so weird they made him the patron saint of animals. Like, I'm just kidding, but like, there's a point there.
Yeah.
I think people get what I'm trying to say. So that sort of stuffiness that people observe from the outside. But then I'll have Catholic friends who will observe other things that aren't stuffy about the Catholic Church. And I actually think this is another episode, Nate.
Yeah.
That I'm getting on, because I have to form some of these thoughts about this, but I do have lots of thoughts about the difference between high church and low church, and I know a lot of people don't like those terms, but I don't know how else to delineate
just thinking through real quick, we're talking about stuffiness, and sort of like when you go to a Catholic service, which my family, for the most part, is lapsed Irish Catholic, but that means that they're going to have their wedding, they're going to have a christening, they're going to have their funeral in the church. It is stuffy. Like, if you don't know what you're doing, you're like, wait, everyone's standing? Oh, everyone's kneeling? Like, what?
Right.
Or if you go to a mega church, Baptist church, you're like, oh, like, I can get down with a guitar. Mm-hmm. Now, what's funny is they're almost the polar opposite in lifestyle. There are some key doctrines that are going to hold with all the church, like no sex before marriage, be kind, be generous, but you can't drink alcohol in the Southern Baptist tradition.
Yeah.
At all. Like when I had to sign a waiver when I was getting SBC money to plant the church that I would abstain 100% from alcohol. Mm-hmm. But I've been to some banging Catholic parties.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like in some ways that they have the stuffiness inside the service, and that's a sacred holy space.
Yeah.
And you get out and you're like, let's party.
Yeah. I've had Catholics come to our Protestant church in Brattleboro and complain about the grape juice.
Yeah.
It's like, why? Like, Jesus drank wine.
Yeah.
Just, like, almost...
Not according to my seminary professors or other...
Not... like, they weren't, like, quite... not quite on the level of belligerence.
Yeah.
But you could, like, see it just there beneath the surface. Like
what's going on?
You're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
And I think they almost don't care about anything else, too. That it's like, the Catholics come into a Protestant church and they're like, okay, so sermon's 30 minutes, 40 minutes, instead of 15, big deal.
Yeah.
Like, the songs are a little bit irreverent, but, like, they're good. If the band's good, they'll be like, oh, this is fun. I like doing this. I'm into it. Like, if the sermon's, like, applicable and not anti-Catholic, they'll be like, that's great. But, like, they really care about how you do communion. Like, they really care about that. Yeah. They're just like, if that's informal, if that's too informal, which it's easy to be too informal during communion for Catholics, they'll just be like,
right.
Can't you just, like, nobody blessed it.
Right.
Like...
Right. It's not a sacrament anymore.
You're just like, here's some grape juice. Like, it's Jesus. And, and I kind of get where they're coming from.
Yeah.
So, with that, Cleese and
John
Lewis...
Cleese, everybody.
Cleese and Lewis are not the same, but they are.
Yeah.
Just like the wine and the blood.
And ended on transubstantiation, I guess.
Yeah. Why not?
Have a great week, everyone.